I was sitting in the open air car of a moving train. The canyon walls on either side of me were close enough that I felt like I could reach out and touch them. Red rock, ancient volcanic basalt, bald eagles, mountain lions, and bears. And the only way to see this canyon is to be on this train. And I almost didn't get a seat. But let's back up, because before the train, before the canyon, before any of that, something happened when I pulled into this RV park that I did not see coming at all. In the past 3 years, I've stayed at a lot of Thousand Trails parks. I've been doing this long enough that I have opinions, strong ones. Willie also has opinions, though his are mostly about whether or not there's a dog park. Verde Valley in Cottonwood, Arizona is the best Thousand Trails park I've ever been in. I want to be specific about that because I don't throw best around lightly anymore. I've learned that best is a thing you say before you've been enough places, and then you have to walk it back. But I'm standing by best in this park. It's spacious. The facilities are clean. The scenery. You're in Verde Valley, surrounded by red rock and desert mountains and sky that Arizona just does better than most places. And in the lounge and recreation center, there's an electric fireplace and comfortable, clean couches. It's a great place to sit and do some work or read a book. I am not a complicated creature. There is plenty of local shopping only about 20 minutes away. Everything you could need. Gas stations, grocery stores, a Walmart, and lots of wineries. There's one that's only a short bike ride away from the campground. The setup was smooth, a pull-through site, full hookups. Most sites here are 30 amp. It was a good level site. No drama. This is about as close to a soft landing as the RV life gets, meaning it was easy. And I'm grateful for that because the next morning, things got interesting in the best possible way. Hey, before we get into the rest of Verde Valley, I want to tell you about something I just put on my website that I think you're going to love. If you've ever wondered whether RV life could actually work for you, not the fantasy version, the real version, I made a free 10-question quiz called Is RV Life for You? It takes about 3 minutes, and at the end, you get a personalized result based on your actual answers, not just a generic yes or no. I'll put the link in the description, and it's also right on my homepage at makingmyownlane.com. It's free, it takes 3 minutes, and honestly, it might just be the thing that helps you figure out your next chapter. Okay, back to Verde Valley. Here's the thing about being on the road solo for this long. You're able to build a whole community of people. I have been talking to Sherry from Silver Mermaid Adventures, on the phone for almost a year. We connected online when she started her solo journey, and Sherry has been one of those people I talk to fairly regularly on the phone. Road stories, trip planning, the kind of conversation that only makes sense between people who get it. We had never been in the same place at the same time. I pulled into Verde Valley, went through my whole arrival routine, checked the site, got Willie settled, did the hookups, and then I looked over at the rig parked right next to me. And I thought, that looks familiar. Sherry had arrived 20 minutes before me. Out of this entire park, with all of its sites and all of its possible configurations, we ended up parked right next to each other. I don't know what to do with that kind of coincidence, except accept it and be grateful. A year of phone calls, and the first time we meet in person, we're neighbors in an Arizona campground. We spent the next several days exploring together, which, if you've been following along this trip, you know is a departure from my usual one woman and her dog situation. Willie approved of Sherry immediately, and he's a very good judge of character. And then we discovered that winery a bike ride away from the campground. Now, I should mention that Verde Valley is not flat. None of Arizona is flat. But I have my Velotric e-bike, which folds up and travels with me in the RV. And it has become one of the best decisions I made before this trip. Hills that would have ended a bike ride before it started are suddenly just part of the ride. We got to this amazing green grass oasis in the desert, enjoyed the wine, the food, and the amazing view. More than once. That is a sentence I genuinely did not expect to say about an RV park in Arizona. Yet, here we are. One of the places we visited was Montezuma's Castle. And I need to tell you something about the name Montezuma's Castle before we get into it, because the name is wrong on 2 counts. It has nothing to do with Montezuma, and it's not a castle. When American soldiers arrived here in the 1860s, they assumed anything that impressive and ancient must be connected to the Aztec Emperor Montezuma. It wasn't. The people who built this were the Sinagua, a pre-Columbian people who lived throughout this region for centuries. And they completed most of this structure around 1100 AD. The name Montezuma was just wishful mythology for people who didn't know what they were looking at. And it stuck anyway, because that is how bad names work. What it actually is a 5-story, 5,000 square foot, 20-room dwelling built into a natural limestone alcove about 100 feet up the cliff face. The Sinagua didn't build down by the river where life would have been easier. They built it up there, presumably for protection. And they did it so well that it's still standing after 9 centuries. There's no access to the structure anymore.
Looks like they created a diorama of the cliff dwelling on October 1st, 1951, because they closed the site from people going up into the cliffs. But they wanted to be able to provide a glimpse into the castle interior to show visitors who were no longer able to access its rooms.
You view it from below, which is the right call for preservation. But honestly, looking up at it from the ground might be more impressive anyway. You're standing there with your neck craned back, doing the math on what it would take to construct something at that elevation without modern equipment. And the math doesn't resolve into anything comfortable. I used my America the Beautiful Senior Pass for entry, which, if you're age 62 or older and you have not gotten one of these, stop what you're doing and get one. It's $80 total for the rest of your life. It covers entrance fees for you and 3 others at national parks and monuments. And it has paid for itself multiple times over on this trip alone, including 50% off on camping in national parks. We left Montezuma's castle, not knowing there was a second site nearby. Here's a small lesson in reading the full brochure before you leave a national monument. So we did what anyone would do, and we went back the next day to Montezuma's well. It's a separate site about 11 miles from the castle. It has cliff dwellings and remarkable Sinagua history. It's worth its own visit. Sherry and I did not know it existed until we were back at the campground that evening, and I was reading about what we'd seen that day. The well is a collapsed limestone sinkhole, what geologists called a karst, K-A-R-S-T, feature.
Traditional stories of the Yavapai or Yavapai and Apache say that once something emerges from the vents at the bottom of the well, it can never return. Even in times of drought, about 1.6 million gallons of water flow through 2 main vents at the well's bottom each day. And the water's about 74 degrees. There are no fish. Just leeches.
Yep. Oh, yeah. We
jump on in.
About 55 feet deep and about a third of a mile across. The springs at the bottom pump out over 1 million gallons of water every day. Every single day. The water has a high dissolved carbon dioxide content that makes it uninhabitable for most fish and aquatic life, which actually makes it interesting to scientists who study extremophile organisms, things that live in conditions where most things can't.
The well is the world's only home for 5 species, including a miniature shrimp-looking amphipod, a leech, a tiny snail, a water scorpion, and a type of one-celled plant called a diatom.
They built irrigation canals from the well out into the surrounding valley, canals that are still partially intact today, right there. You can see them, and they use them to farm in the desert. The ingenuity of it.
Oh, poison ivy area. That'll keep you out. But look at the architecture on this. Poison ivy and spiders.
Using 1 million gallons every day of naturally pressurized spring water to build an agricultural system in a dry climate, 800 years before anyone would have thought to call it engineering. And there are cliff dwellings here too, tucked up into the walls of the sinkhole.
So I guess that answers my question then. They really are old.
So George H. Rothwalk, a pioneering Arizona photographer, took advantage of the site's popularity and painted his advertising on the rocks overhead.
It's wild.
It is wild.
This place is smaller than the castle, quieter, and more intimate. Fewer visitors. If you're choosing between them, do the well. If you have time, do them both. The next day we went to Jerome. Jerome is perched on the side of Cleopatra Hill at about a 5,000-foot elevation, which means the drive up is the kind of switchback road where you make friends with your brakes. It's not at the top of the mountain. It's literally built into the side of the mountain. Because of what I'd heard about the road to Jerome, Sherry drove. Honestly, the road wasn't that bad. Next week, I'll show you another road that I decided to be the driver for. At its peak in the early 1900s, Jerome was one of the largest copper mining towns in Arizona, the fourth largest city in the whole state, with a population pushing 15,000 people. The United Verde mine was one of the richest copper deposits in the country. The ore came out of that mountain by the billions of pounds, and the money that followed it created a town that knew exactly what it was and had absolutely no interest in being respectable about it. Jerome was known during its boom years as the wickedest town in the West. That was not said as a criticism. That was essentially the marketing. At its height, Jerome had more than 20 saloons running around the clock. It had brothels operating openly on what everyone referred to as, and I am not making this up, Husband's Alley. It had opium dens, gambling halls, and a jail that the newspapers described as the busiest building in town. The whole enterprise was fueled by miners who worked brutal 12-hour shifts in a mountain and came out the other end wanting to spend their time and money on something other than sleep. The company that owned the mine, Phelps Dodge, eventually took the town over and spent decades trying to clean Jerome up because a town with that kind of reputation was bad for the corporate image. They mostly failed. Jerome was going to be Jerome. Then the copper ran out. Not all at once, it was a slow decline through the 1930s and 40s. But by 1953, the mine closed for good. The company left. Most of the population followed. Within a few years, a town that held 15,000 people was down to fewer than 100. Buildings literally started sliding down the hillside. Jerome is built on an unstable slope, and without the constant maintenance of an active population, things moved, literally. There's a building in Jerome called the Sliding Jail, a concrete structure that has migrated 225 feet downhill from where it was originally built. And it wasn't erosion that did it. It was mine blasting. The company was detonating massive amounts of explosives underground to open up new ore deposits. The ground shook, and the jail slid right off its foundation and came to rest in the middle of Hull Avenue, one of Jerome's main streets. The town's response was essentially, fine, we'll just reroute the road around it, which they did. But the story doesn't end there. Eventually, the Arizona Department of Transportation decided they'd had enough of routing a main road around the jail, and they simply pushed it farther downhill to clear the street. So the building you see today when you visit Jerome is actually in its third location, not where it was built, not where it landed, but where the state of Arizona shoved it out of the way. The Jerome Historical Society took it over in 2017 and stabilized it so it wouldn't collapse. It is, against all odds, still standing. The mine that built the town was also, it turns out, slowly destroying it from underneath.
Oh, there's a little alleyway there.
Oh, the blowing studio. Wow.
What did it used to be, though? I mean, there's got to be a sign on here. Because this is obviously not, it has not always been a studio. Look at these stairs. Unusable, but once usable.
Between 1894 and 1899, Jerome burned down 4 times. The first fire in April 1894 took out 2 blocks of the commercial district. The Christmas Eve fire of 1897 burned through the Tenderloin district, a bordello, 4 saloons, and a boarding house. The September 1898 fire was the worst of them. A Phoenix newspaper wrote that Jerome's fiery breath had blown Jerome off the face of the earth. At least 18 people died. And then in May 1899, 24 saloons and dozens of homes went up in flames. After each fire, people lived in tents while they rebuilt, only to have it burn down again. The conditions were a perfect recipe for disaster. Pine buildings, covered in canvas, packed tightly, together on a steep hillside, lit by kerosene lamps, clay and wood chimneys. It was the 1899 fire, consuming buildings that had just been rebuilt from the previous 2 fires, that finally pushed the town to incorporate. They needed a fire department. And to get one, they needed tax revenue. So Jerome officially became a town, adopted one of Arizona's first building codes, disallowing new wood buildings, and stopped the town from burning quite so often. The thing is, the cheap real estate, the dramatic scenery, and the leftover Victorian architecture started attracting artists in the 1960s and 70s. Then more artists, then galleries, then restaurants, then tourists who wanted to see all of it. And somewhere in that chain, Jerome stopped being a ghost town and became something harder to categorize. A living, slightly eccentric, small city that has figured out how to make its own disreputable past into something people drive up switchback mountain roads to experience. Sherry and I had lunch at the Haunted Hamburger, which has the best name of any restaurant I visited on this entire trip. The food was good. The view from the deck, looking out over the Verde Valley far below, is the kind of view that makes you sit a little longer than you planned. I cannot report on any paranormal activity because I didn't experience any. But I appreciate a restaurant that commits to a haunting. Walking the main street is the kind of thing that rewards wandering slowly. Galleries, antique shops, a mining museum, doorways opening to spaces that feel like they've barely changed since 1910.
I'm just curious. Let's see how long it is.
Oh, don't go there, Sherry.
I just want to read about it.
Okay. All right. What did you do now? They're shooting off things at the top.
Jerome earned its reputation the hard way, lost everything, and then rebuilt itself on the ruins of its own legend. I had booked the Verde Canyon Railroad about a month before I got to Verde Valley. I want to make sure that lands correctly. 1 month in advance. And it was close. This train runs a 4-hour round trip through 20 miles of Verde Canyon from Clarkdale through a wilderness that only has 1 long dirt road. The only way in is the railroad, which has been running since 1912. It was originally built to haul ore and supplies up to the mines at Jerome. The copper is long gone, but the track is still here. The $1 million slag pile is still here. Slag is what's left over after copper has been mined out of the ground. And now it hauls people like me who want to see a piece of Arizona that most of the world simply never accesses. And it sells out every day, not just weekends, every single day of operation. I've since heard from people who tried to book 2 weeks out and couldn't get a seat. Book early. I will link everything in the description for you. Because the train is not dog friendly, Willie did not come on this one. Willie stayed at the park in the air conditioning, while I sat in my air-conditioned car and had a champagne toast. The train runs open-air cars in between the regular cars, which is where I stationed myself for most of the 4 hours. I want to try and describe what this canyon actually looks like from inside it, because I had seen the photos, and the photos do not do it justice. The walls are red and black and rust-colored, layers of sandstone and ancient lava flows stacked on top of each other over millions of years. The Verde River runs alongside the tracks the whole way, green and clear in the desert light. Cottonwood and sycamore trees line the banks, and when you get deep enough into the canyon, the world outside seems to disappear entirely. There are no roads visible, no power lines, no buildings. Nothing that suggests the 21st century exists at all, except the train you're standing on. We saw bald eagles. Verde Canyon is one of their nesting areas, and the guides on board know where to look. They called out a nest in a cliff face that I never would have found on my own. There's a section of the route where the canyon narrows and the walls rise straight up on both sides, and the sky above you becomes a thin ribbon of blue. And I stood on the back of that open-air car and just stopped talking to myself, which doesn't happen very often. And there's an unexpected tunnel where the other passengers howled like wolves. There's one thing that happens at the turnaround point that I want to make sure you know about before you go, because it's worth watching for. The end point is Perkinsville, a ghost town deep in the canyon, sitting on private ranch land. So passengers stay on the train. Before the return trip begins, the engine detaches from the front of the train and rolls along beside you to reattach at the back, because there's no loop, no turnaround track, no way to spin the whole train around. The engine just rolls itself to the other end and becomes a new rear. Then you head back the way you came, only now what was behind you is in front of you, and the canyon looks entirely different from the other direction. The afternoon light comes in at a different angle. The shadows fall on different walls. It is somehow almost like a different trip. The turnaround point is also worth noting for another reason. Perkinsville Depot was a filming location for scenes in How the West Was Won. It was the Trailside Hotel, just in case you need one more reason to keep your eyes open. The whole trip is 4 hours. The train moves slowly enough to actually see things, which is a gift. So much of travel is moving too fast, past places that deserve more attention. This is the opposite of that. I thought about how this track was originally built to pull ore out of a mountain, how it outlasted the mine and the company and the whole economy that created it. And now it exists to carry people through a canyon that would otherwise be invisible to most of the world. Things find their second purpose if you leave them standing long enough. That might also be something Jerome taught me. I've been on the road for a while now, long enough that I've stopped being surprised when things go right. I've started to expect the good parts, not take them for granted exactly, but trust that they're coming. What I didn't expect was Sherry being parked next to me. I didn't expect that the ruins we visited would have a whole second chapter 11 miles away that we would have driven past without knowing. I didn't expect that small haunted town built into a southwest hillside. That's what keeps happening out here. You plan as much as you can, you book the train a month in advance, and you find new places to explore as you travel. I'm Nancy. This is Making My Own Lane. We're somewhere in Arizona, and there's a lot more to show you. So be sure to subscribe and hit that like button and share this with someone who may be considering RV life or Southwest travel themselves, because this is the fun part of RV life. Next week, I asked AI to plan 5 full days of hiking in Sedona for a moderately active 63-year-old with a Shih Tzu. Then I actually went and did it. The next video is my honest report of how that went. I think you're going to find it interesting. I'll see you next week in Sedona.